Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Science of SaaS Startups podcast. Today, I'm talking to Ahmed Elsamadisi. Ahmed is the founder and CEO of Narrator.ai. They're a self-service data platform, which allows anyone to answer data requests in a simple and fast platform. Ahmed, welcome.
Thank you, Ben. Glad to be here.
So I just want to kick things off by asking a couple of questions just to help the audience get to know you a little bit. So there's a lot of billionaires jumping into space right now. So if I offered you a ticket, would you jump straight on that rocket?
No, I actually was in a conference with a bunch of Fortune 500 companies, and Virgin Galactic was on stage, and they said, "Raise your hand if you would be on the next trip for $250,000. You would fly to space." And like half the room raised their hand, and I was like, "This is more surprising than I thought." But I personally, I love space, but I wouldn't do it. I think there's I'd rather take that time and energy and explore more of what the beautiful Earth has.
Okay.
So there's still so many places I haven't been.
So you're waiting for the technologies a little bit more developed, is that
right? Not really. I really trust technology. Usually in space travel, they're pretty I trust technology a lot more. I had an autonomous car in 2010, so I was very trusting of technology early on. I just find that just for me, space doesn't interest me as much as exploring some oceans and some different places. So it's just not a thing. I'm just oh, space.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So what skill in business or life do you really wish that you had, but that you found tough to master or that you just don't have at the moment?
So I feel like there is, well, the most common answer that I think I would probably stand by is communication, a certain level of communication. The book that I always recommend people reading, anyone who joins Narrator reads it, is Never Split the Difference, because it's really about communicating for the other person and being heard. And you don't learn that really ever. You kind of learn how to put sentences together, put comments together, but you never learn how to communicate. There's never in school or until you start a company, they're never hey, talk to an investor and say the same thing to a marketer and say the same thing to a salesperson. And you realize that you have to change your entire how you talk, what you say, what references you use. And I feel like that's a skill that's always kind of being sharpened, especially in your day-to-day. Especially if you're a CEO, you switch between investor, engineer, product, marketing, and all these different people. And every time you talk to them, you have to explain what you're trying to do a little bit differently. Otherwise, it gets lost. So I think that's a skill that I would like to continue to get better at.
Yeah, okay. I've just written that down actually, because I've never heard of that book. And I think that's really important because, as you say, everybody chooses the way that they engage with someone. So unless you're kind of engaging, for them and that person and what they want to hear, that's absolutely crucial. So when you were growing up, what music were you listening to? And are you still listening to it now?
So the answer is yes, I'm still listening to now. I grew up in Egypt, so we were listening to a lot of Arabic music, and Arabic music is a lot more centered around dance. So it's I don't recall ever just sitting and listening to music if I wasn't dancing. It's not a thing that we did early on in Egypt. So a lot of the music I listen to is just fun dance music, and I still like to go dancing. So I still, every now and then in events or situations, I'll find an excuse to play a little bit of one Arabic song in, so that people just are whoa, that's different. But it's always a lot of fun. So I still listen to that whenever I want to get in a high energy mood.
Okay, is it part of the Monday morning routine to get everybody in the office going?
Yeah, it's the secret. No, that was not how we do it. No, but we should. Honestly, random dance breaks sounds like a great idea. We should always have them.
Okay, and when was the last time that you felt really proud of yourself?
Honestly, yesterday I had such a great day that I was just I was talking to my team and I was I'm not going to sleep today because it's been such a perfect day to go back to back. And I think that there's moments. So Narrator is a self-serve analytic tool, and what we do, if people are familiar with data space, people think it's impossible. We spend the first 3 years being told it's absolutely impossible. And now that we have a product that's like functioning and we have customers that are loving it, we still start every demo with like, your claim sounds like bullshit. And we're like, yeah, I know it sounds like bullshit, but let me tell you about it. And there is this whole vision that we always had, which was we wanted to take all the data in the world, to standardize it into a single table, a customer 360, enable anyone to answer any question. And then once you can answer any question, I wanted everyone to be able to get that quality data science level analysis that you would ask an expert to do for you instantly in a human understandable format that you can actually make a decision and act. So really go to the end-to-end self-serve. And that last part is like human format and instantly in 5 minutes, like get that whole end-to-end question to detailed analysis to act. That was like the dream of Narrator. That's when we founded Narrator 5 years ago. That was the goal. And yesterday was the day we like deployed internally that last feature. So it was like, well, that's the vision. Like, I am amazed that it's all come together. Like, this is Narrator. This is what I started seeing. And I think that moment is like very proud of my team and like me for lasting this long and continuing to do it and just watching it unfold. So that was a truly incredible moment for me and team. And I'm actually excited to eventually deploy to the customers and see how they react to it, to see what they see when they get the end-to-end experience.
Yeah, it's like those little buzz days that you get in startups, you just don't get in a bigger company.
Yeah, I used to like, sometimes you get in big companies. I used to work for Raytheon and it was like missile defense. And every time you like deployed an algorithm and you were like, this is now going to be like in the world, like defending against missiles and it's tactical and like, that's crazy. You would have a celebration and it would like, you would realize like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, if a nuke hits America, like I wrote that, like, oh shit.
Yeah.
But I think in startups, because of their pace, you have that a lot more frequent and you have a lot more customer engagement in it. Like you get, as you do it, your customers are involved and they're watching you grow and they're involved in, like they're part of the journey. So like, I think a lot of our customers would look at them as like, they're like secretly part of the company too. And I think that's an exciting feeling for everyone to feel just bigger than yourself.
Yeah, okay. So like when I was reading around Narrator, you know, it seemed like the main thing that you were trying to do was move the industry and data professionals away from the star schema modeling approach. Mm-hmm. Could you just describe a little bit about what you see as being the key drawbacks with that approach?
Yeah, so I have this theory that if like 95% of people who implement it find issues, and like even if something is theoretically sound, but every time it's implemented, it doesn't work out, then maybe something's wrong with the framework. So star schema in theory makes perfect sense. It takes your data, structures it in the way that you want to answer questions, you imagine, and then you put it in a BI tool and you can slice and dice it. The challenge is in today's world, your data doesn't fit perfectly in as simple as that. In like the way you kind of assemble it, it's actually a lot more complicated. And we have like many tools in the middle to help you manage it. But you still like have like huge data engineering teams, thousands of lines of code doing these things to get these tables. And then all it takes, and you're a stakeholder, and I'm sure you work with a data team, and you're like, but I want to add this other column, or I want to slice it by this other thing, or I want to look at not just how somebody calls us, but if somebody calls us in 10 minutes and how that changes if they call us in 30 minutes. Those slight, tiny twist on questions end up taking weeks to months from your data team if they're willing to actually add that complexity to the table. And like most people don't realize how complicated it is just to add that. It's like just add an extra column. But like to a data engineer, you're like, that's like months of work and that's a nightmarish task. So that happens to everyone. Everyone who implements it goes through this thing. It gets so unmanageable that they refactor every 2 years and they throw all their work away. And then they go, we need to rebuild this thing and think about a better starting table, because you start with these tables and they grow and they become unmanageable. And then you refactor and you start and you keep doing this. And every time you do it, it's super costly, super exhausting, and it erodes trust of your data team. So the idea was, how do you, if I can't find like 5 companies, and I looked, like before I started Narrator, I went on a whole spree when I was at WeWork talking to every like big company, being like, how do you solve this problem? And the most common thing is like, that's just the nature of data. Like that's the nature of the beast. Like
Yeah.
that's what happens. You do it, you have to do it. And you try to like delay how long it takes you to refactor and just be better at it in the beginning. But like, of course it's like you have this naturally chaotic system growing. Of course it's gonna reach a point where you have to, it explodes, but it's just how slow can you make that that happen? So that was the problem. So we started Narrator with the idea of, well, what if that wasn't the case? Like, what if those questions that were seemed simple to the stakeholder's mind were actually simple? And what if your system didn't become more chaotic? And it was inspired by the idea of anti-fragility. What if, like, as chaos grew, your system actually got better, not worse, but better, it got more powerful. And that's kind of what we ended up building.
And can you like talk to me like about this concept of narratives that you've got, and how that works, and how somebody would build one of those?
Yeah. So once we started kind of solving the problem of data and getting data you need, it came to how you communicate data. So the way that data is communicated today is through dashboards. You put a dashboard, and the dashboard has a lot of plots and so many visualizations. And the consumer who's reading the dashboard has to, first of all, try to interpret it correctly and get into the mind of the data analyst who built it. And so often that's not what it says. I have spent my life going, that's not what that plot says. Or they'll create associations between two plots. You're like, oh, that's not what that plot says. Like, yeah, they both went up and down, but it's not because they're together. Like, that's just a coincidence. Or like they see month over month up, oh, we're up 10%, we're down 10%, we're up 10%. Oh my God, we're down 10%, what's going on? And you're like, that's just variance. We're moving in time and it's going like this, but it's on the right direction. So stuff like that, dashboards really do a bad job. Or they see a world map and there's a bunch of dots and circles and you're like, what am I supposed to do with it? So the idea of narratives came to be, which is, well, what, as a data person, what do I want to communicate to the stakeholder? And as a stakeholder, what do I want to receive? And we did a lot of work with different stakeholders of different levels. And what we found is that most stakeholders think of questions. They have a question in mind. And first of all, they want an answer right away. They want to know what they're going to learn. And then they want a more guided interpretation of what I'm supposed to consume. They want no fancy visualizations. They want every plot to be easy to consume. So it turns out like that's literally why they pay McKinsey and all these consultants a lot of money, because that's the presentation style that they give you. So we're like, why doesn't data give the information that way? Why don't we enable people to ask, like, the data? Why isn't data created as a question with a clear recommendation up front, with clear takeaways, and then a story where you actually give the interpretation first, and then you show the plot as supporting materials, not give the plot and hope the user can guess everything else. And what we found was that that's what we call a narrative. And they're like these like kind of beautiful presentation level information that's designed to work with live data and communicate with minimal visualizations and tell you put context first. And because of the narrative structure, we actually have been able to build templates and a library of them so people can actually reuse their questions and get full-on analysis, like where should I spend my money, or like what attribution model should I use? And you get a beautiful story that you read. And as you're reading it, you're learning and you're seeing your data help inform your decisions. And we measure ourselves as a narrator based on the actions that people take. It's not about how many dashboards you have or how many queries we ran. It's about how many actions did you take off of something that you did in Narrator. And that's kind of what we optimized for. And we saw that narratives were the best way to optimize that. And we saw that it actually enabled a lot of stakeholders to they get so much trust because of the Narrator system and consistency. Trust is built way faster in Narrator than any other data tool that I've experienced. So people often, stakeholders will read the question. They're like, oh, I know what I'm looking. They read the recommendation. You're like, okay, I trust my team who made this recommendation. I read the key takeaways, what I'm going to learn. And if I care, I'll dive deeper. Otherwise, I'll say, great, here's what we're going to do. And then the person who implements it gets to read an entire story and build that world as if they were doing the analysis. They're going step by step, understanding what's happening, getting key takeaways in every couple of sections, and really ends up being able to act more informed. And then they can log that action. And now they know when they acted and they can see how that thing has affected each story. And by having a collection of stories, that knowledge never gets lost. So no one's like trying to look at these random plots and be like, what does that mean? They just have every single question that the company has ever asked is now captured somewhere with the context built in, with the data updating, with the decisions being able to update. And whether that person leaves or not, everything is stored there now. And companies love it. We have companies that tell us like, hey, I was looking for a question and I found out that somebody asked the same question 6 to 8 months ago. And I just read their entire story and it was great. And I was like, yeah, at WeWork, every 6 months a new executive would come in and we have to redo all the analyses and try to find out, because they weren't looking at the dashboards. We had to build these PowerPoints and being like, shit, where's the PowerPoint? And then all the interpretations of the PowerPoint have changed. So I had to redo the whole work. And I was like, this is so much better that you have this like kind of live moment captured, single purpose thought process with your data, helping you make decisions available at all times. And I think that's what makes narratives really, really special. And that's how they came to be.
And I guess, it's quite intuitive, right? That's how humans kind of interact with each other, is through kind of stories and narratives. Because one thing I was thinking is when you take such a fundamentally different approach to all the other solutions available in the market, does it become like your messaging when you're talking to customers, does it become more about education than anything else? Or do people just get it because it's actually very intuitive to the way humans talk to each other?
So actually, once we sign you as a customer, the initial stage of convincing you is a little bit trickier. But let's say once you get as a customer, what we found in our customers is that non-data people pick up Narrator faster than data people.
Okay.
Because of such human-like Narrator's data models at its core is customer doing stuff in time. You're kind of telling a story, and when you ask a question, you're just asking for what you want the customer journey to look like, and it appears the way you want it in data. So there's a lot of stuff that happens there, but you've brought everything down to a human level: stories, people, your customers, things happening in time. It makes sense. Like the whole idea of the UX was to really change like the thing I said earlier was, I wanted this way the stakeholder to traditionally, stakeholder asks a question. There's a lot of translation so it can become a data question. And then you can query it and then you can use it. What if the way you queried it was exactly so similar to the way that the stakeholder asked the question? When they go, and that's what Narrator does. So people pick it up much, much more naturally. And for data people, they kind of have to unlearn this whole translation step that they're so used to doing. And this whole like complex joins and da-da-da-da. And eventually they pick it up and then they can't go back. Like we have customers that will tell us like, I don't know what I'll do if I don't have Narrator, because there's no way I'm going to go back to spending weeks doing this, but I know I can do it in 5 minutes. Like kind of like I need to use Narrator in every job I go, otherwise I can't have a job. And I'm like, yeah, that's like great thing to hear. So it's a lot more natural when you're thinking about your business that way. When you're reading a story, when things are interpreted for you, it feels like it's like we always say, if you want to know what AI is that if you read it, you think that somebody wrote it for you, custom by hand, even if a machine did it. But you can't tell the difference. And I think what you get with a lot of narratives from our library and a lot of narratives that they read so human-like that you would bet your life that some human being sat down and wrote it and like interpreted your data and made those decisions for you. And that's a system that we created. And that's what makes it manageable. In sales, you do have to do a lot more education. Because you are dealing with something that the entire industry, $1 trillion of all these hundreds of thousands of tools and things are saying, do it this way. And we're not against it. You should use dashboarding when you need it. You should use your transformation layer. You should do all that stuff. But if you want to enable self-serve, you have to do it differently, because dashboarding is not self-serve. You can't do self-serve in that. You can create executive dashboards that are static, that are like updating and managing systems. That's incredible. Do that in your dashboarding tools, because that is like a static thing you're doing. But in a dynamic environment where people are asking new questions and you want to enable true self-serve, you need some fundamentally different approach. And that's kind of why we live in that lane. And people are so used to being promised self-serve and given dashboarding. Like they're like we always tell you, like people are like, oh, well, isn't my BI tool self-serving? And I'm like, can you ask a new question in your BI tool? And they're like, no, all I can do is like slice it and group it. And I'm like, yeah, so if you need to slice and group it or see something live on a pretty screen, like you can use BI tools. But if you're asking new questions and you have new answers and you want something that's working with you to constantly ask and answer questions instantly, That's what self-serve analytics is about. That's the intention. And I have not seen a solution really live up to that. I was just on a call with the company yesterday, and he was like, I've been promised self-serve by so many products. So I'm just letting you know, I don't believe self-serve can exist. And then he's like, I'm ready to get started. Like, let's keep going with the POC. Like, and I'm like, we do this thing. Sorry, a little tangent. Our last meeting in our proof of concept, I say, put self-serve to the test. I sit in front of once we set up Narrator for you, I sit on my computer and you can invite any stakeholder or anyone you want, and I will live take shot fire questions and live answer them using your data. And the goal is I should be able to take your question instantly, shot fired at me, and in 5 minutes give you the answer using your data, using just Narrator and your system. And I think if you could do that, then that's self-serve. That I can sit there and be confident in any question you can come up with, I'll be able to answer. And I think that's the feeling that I want to give everyone. And once people are trained and they use Narrator, then they can do themselves. But I think that's the promise that I have never seen anything other than Narrator really live up to. It's like, give me anyone with any tool and have them be willing to do that. And I'll be like, okay, then you have self-serve. But I'm pretty sure no one has been ever willing to sit there and do that.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to kind of dig into the kind of startup life a little bit, because like you've raised like $13.5 million so far across like a seed and a Series A. And is this your first time as a founder? Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, how have you found like the learning curve, like coming from a company like WeWork into kind of building something for yourself from scratch?
So, well, one, WeWork was a great intro to startup world. Like, I joined WeWork, left and joined again. And the first time I joined, there were 40 people. So it was very early on. So I got to see WeWork grow to be like the monster that it was. And you learn a lot about how scale works and how things change and the dynamicism. And you get to like decide what you want to keep in your company and what you don't want to keep, and what worked well, what didn't work well. So that was a very luxurious experience that most people don't get a chance to have. Like, and a lot of the decisions that we make at Narrator come from that experience. So I think starting a company was a mixed bag. I think most founders will tell you the same thing. For the first like couple of years, you don't believe that you're doing it. You're just like,
yeah,
like you're like you've gotten your like, I got like my closest like friends, people that I used to work with that we work and respected a lot, like the VP of engineering, my boss's boss, like they came and joined, the principal front-end engineer, like they came and joined. So they had known what we were doing, and it was like a team of like mostly WeWork people that left and came and built and joined in Narrator. And we were trying to figure this out together. We knew we had an impossible problem. We had an idea of what we wanted to do, but we didn't have a playbook. We didn't have no solution. Especially if you're doing something that's like non-standard. Like, I think it's a lot easier when you're like, I'm gonna be Warby, but for like playing cards. Like, you have a playbook. When you're doing like, I'm gonna change how people think about data and answer any question, you're like, who do I follow? So the founding story, you're kind of still learning, and you're kind of still realizing that it's real. Like, there's people who depend on you. There's a whole organization that you're managing. There's something a lot bigger, and you grow up pretty fast that way. Like, as CEO, the buck stops with you. Like, people will talk, but they come up and they need a decision. And I think your decision making changes a lot more. Like, it's about making a decision is more important than making the right decision, which is like a very weird thing that you learn as a CEO. Like, you need to make a decision when you need to make a decision. Making the right decision doesn't matter. You will make the wrong decision 100 times and make the right decision. Decisions themselves, no one decision matters, which is another thing to not realize, you eventually realize, is that there's no, I think anyone who tells you like, oh, that one decision made the company or broke the company, it's not possible. Your company survives by hundreds of decisions being made in parallel, or hundreds of bad decisions being made together that cause it to decay. And you end up just, so I think the founder life is those decision making that you have to do, the exhaustion of that, just like all the skills that you need kind of get twisted. And you're like, oh, I need to grow up. I have responsibilities of this team and people. And you have a culture and something that you're creating that is bigger than yourself, that you want to embody, and your ideals that you like. I sat on the other side and watched CEO, and I was like, why don't they do this? And now you're on the other side, and you're like, oh my God, like this is way more complicated.
It's harder than
like,
it looks. Yeah.
Damn. Like, we had all these like premises in Narrator that were the way we like kind of operated, and how we want to like split between like your life, your family. Like, I don't want Narrator to be your identity. I don't want people to be like people love being like, I'm a WeWorker, or like, but I'm like, no, Narrator is what you work. Like, it's only a small part of your life. You have your family, you have your things, and I want you to dedicate time to that. And also love what you do. And don't put the company first, which is something that I've always wanted as an employee, for people to not tell me my life should be this company and I should die for it. Just don't die for your company. Hell no. You want to create something incredible, but you're going to exhaust yourself if you're dying for it. Like, why? Like, people that I'm anti-bootstrap for the same reason. People are like, I'm just going to fight till death and like live off ramen and like show the world. I'm like, no, write a good deck, get some money, have other people fund your passion, because if you truly know what you're doing, like truly have that goal, you're going to make them a lot of money and they're going to be happy, and you don't have to die for it. So those mentality shifts, when you set it, you're like, it's just so different. It's like such a different thing. So many of my ideals are being put to test now. And we are a very, very, very extremely idealistic company, like way too idealistic by most people who know us in like the world that we want to create. But we're trying it. And I think there's that like balance of like, just the learning curve is insane. What it comes down to.
Like, one of the interesting things about you guys is you started as a consultancy, is that right? Using your tool, and then have obviously developed that into being like a pure software company. Like, what do you think are the key lessons that you learned by doing it that way around?
Yeah, well, we experienced the problem, so we knew the problem so well. So the challenge with starting a company like Narrator is we knew the problem incredibly well. We knew what caused it. We had a bunch of hypotheses for ways to change it, but nothing has ever worked. So when you're building a solution, there's ways where you kind of sell the dream, get customers to battle test it, and then they like hate you, and then you kind of iterate and try to like build what the customer wants. We didn't feel like that was the right way of doing it. So instead, what we did was we went out and said, I will be responsible for delivering the answer, and I'll use my tool every single day. And let's put it to test. If I want to get to self-serve, I should be able to support 10 customers, like pretend to be 10 data teams and have all those questions from 10 different companies shoot fire at me, and I should be able to respond. And we wanted to build our product through that way. So we would sell as consultancy, deal with the intakes of questions coming in, and learn about when our system, what doesn't work, what works. And like the first version of Narrator looked like an airplane dashboard. Like it was like 100 buttons and 100 checkboxes, and now it's like 3. So like because we were like, we couldn't scale, like we're like, oh shit, people are asking us questions, and why doesn't all this happen automatically? Why am I clicking? And that frustration with our tool and our ability as engineers to kind of iterate and make better, understand with real world scenarios, there's nothing like experiencing solving that problem. And I think that culture carried over. I think that, like, I can tell you, I personally, we can look at my data in Narrator, but I log into Narrator and use Narrator every single day. Half the team who are probably, I think everyone except for maybe one person is logging to Narrator every single day, using the product, either answering questions, using it for us to understand our own data, or doing it as part of their day-to-day. So we are so ingrained in the product, which is very different than most companies. Like we used to, like a lot of other bigger companies, the CEOs even have their app on their phone, or like they haven't even launched their product in years. But by starting as a consultancy, we were so used to using our product to kind of build it, that when we gave it to customers, we knew what they were going to experience because we had lived it. We had lived the pain, we had lived the solution, and we had such a strong idea of what we were trying to create and when it was bad. And now we are a company that uses our product every single day. And I think that's like the best. Like you have to love your product a lot if you're going to use it every single day. And a lot of people don't use their product every day.
Yeah, and kind of knowing what your customers are experiencing, like that, that's invaluable, isn't it? So just a final question, because I'm mindful of your time. So what would your message be to any kid out there who's got a big idea and no idea what to do with it? What would you say would be the first kind of practical steps that somebody could take to get them on the right path?
Yeah, so I have like 3 suggestions and they happen in order. So the first one is Google it. See if that product exists. Now, after you see that product exists, put a calendar invite for yourself to check in within a month and see if you use that product every day. I can tell you 90% of people I've talked to have been like, oh, I have the most brilliant idea. Oh shit, it exists. And I'm like, this brilliant idea that's gonna change the world, you found it and you don't use it? Like, you're not using the brilliant idea that you thought was gonna change the world? Why do you think that happens? So that's an interesting way to kind of truly learn a little bit about how ideas are such easily stories. We can tell ourselves stories really quickly. The second thing is understand why, understand the problem. More than anything, understand the problem, why the world exists the way it is with that problem. Like every problem is solved. If no one has solved the problem, like, or hacked at the problem or tried to solve it, like, then it's not a problem. Problems people hate, they figure out ways to solve it. Their solutions can suck and the solutions can be inefficient. And that's what you innovate on. You never like say this problem has never had it. So figure out what the problem is, learn a lot about the problem and why the tools they do have made it the way they've made it. Like understand the history behind the companies that have been able to like hack the solution of the problem, so that when you go into it, you understand like they're not crazy. You're not like there's a lot of brilliant people out there. So like you're not this like visionary person who's thought of something that no one has thought of. Everything has been thought of before, and you should look and say, now what about the execution that you can do differently that enables you to actually compete? So that's the second thing. The third thing is go raise money. Like I'm very, very big fan of putting your ability to communicate your problem and solution and have external people like be forced to put their money where their mouth is. So you can be in a room and build it and say, I will prove the world wrong. Or you can be like, I'm gonna try to convince you of it. And then you're gonna fund me as I show you how this is created in the world. So that last one really does a bunch of things. It forces you to learn how to communicate your idea, which is going to be critical. It helps you find someone else who's invested in it, who cares about it. It's going to teach you how to hire someone first. And it creates that world where you are not building it in your head, you're building it for someone else. And that's that like external presence is going to help you kind of accelerate that forward. And that's kind of one of my always recommendations. There are stories of like people who ignored all those 3 things and have done it very differently and like figured it out. I'm just saying that the most common solution is those like one-off people who build one-off or one-off people. Like you never build for an outlier. You build for the majority. And I think most of the companies that have actually been able to grow came from understanding the problem, knowing the history behind why other competitors really do what they do, and finally finding people to believe in them and follow them as they kind of grow.
Yeah, no, I think that's an absolutely brilliant answer. Well, it's been really good having you on. Thank you for joining us today. If people want to get in touch and discuss Narrator, what's the best way to get in touch with LinkedIn or email?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best. You can book a demo on our website and you can email me also. So those are the 3 options, but LinkedIn is usually where I'm most available and active. I also have a Twitter and all that stuff, but like LinkedIn, start there. We can book some time and we'll chat.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today and it's really kind of fascinating to hear about what you're doing. And, I really look forward to kind of following the next stage of your growth.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Ben. And I'm excited to see how this all comes out. And hopefully some people enjoyed it.
Yeah, okay, cheers, Ahmed.
Cheers.